Good afternoon. It's Friday the 12th of March 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We'll get straight on with Astrazeneca, which of course, a bit of problems for them. They seem to have been cancelled, banned, deplatformed perhaps, we might say. Bulgaria joined the cancellation this morning. Canada, Australia, Mexico, the Philippines, South Korea, Thailand, Denmark, I think kicked it off. Norway and Iceland have all decided to at least suspend the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Italy and Austria have stopped using a particular batch. And some people saying that this is not the same batch that's been used in the UK. Canada is continuing to encourage people to get the jab, but not the AstraZeneca one. So Health Canada is aware of reports of adverse events in Europe following immunisation with AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine and would like to reassure Canadians that the benefits of the vaccine continue to outweigh the risks. So that seems to be a bit schizophrenic, but anyway. Denmark was saying that it was pausing for 14 days, not opting out completely. They were very keen to stress that. So what has the MHRA said? Well, they said vaccine safety is of paramount importance and we continue to monitor the safety of vaccines to ensure that the benefits outweigh any potential risks. That's very similar to what Canada said. That could be a rapid response mechanism at work there, making sure we've got a common narrative. But anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, it has not been confirmed that the report of a blood clot in Denmark was caused by the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca. They said blood clots can occur naturally and are not uncommon. More than 11 million doses of the vaccine have now been administered across the UK. Reports of blood clots received so far are not greater than the number that would have occurred naturally in the vaccinated population, is what they are claiming. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, do you trust the regulators? Because they haven't been doing a whole lot of regulation, haven't they? Aren't these vaccines, haven't they been waved through under emergency measures? Is that right?
Yeah, it's absolutely right, yes.
So that means the regulators really haven't been involved. They've been sidelined by the emergency declaration, haven't they?
Well, they certainly haven't had the data and valued the data over a terribly great length of time. So that certainly is a reasonable thing to say.
That would be the number one cause of concern, wouldn't it? That a vaccine that would normally take 4 to 10 years to develop has basically been knocked out in 8 months, right?
Yes. But Dr. Bhakti said something on this recently.
Dr. Sucharit Bhakti from the University of Mainz in Germany, one of the most cited immunologists, by the way, probably in Europe. He's among the top. So he's super qualified in this area. Now we'll show you the letter that he and other doctors have drafted to the European Medicines Agency. We'll show that in a minute, but let's listen to what he has to say about blood clots. You mentioned blood clots before.
Yes. Well, that is the whole reason that this situation has arisen, that there's suspension across so many countries for AstraZeneca.
Incredibly, when they put this statement together, it was a few weeks ago, and they had already highlighted that, flagged that as one of the number one risks of these vaccine products. Let's go ahead and hear what he has to say.
Yeah.
Two dangerous things must then be expected to happen. Firstly, many copies of the virus spike will appear on the cell surface. These may directly bind and activate blood platelets, which will trigger blood clotting. Secondly, the cells producing the spike protein may be attacked by our own immune system because the immune system is trained to recognize and destroy cells that produce the virus. Damage to the blood vessel lining must be expected to cause the blood to clot as well. The effect is likely magnified in individuals receiving their second vaccinations, as well as in patients who have been infected with any coronavirus shortly before or after vaccination. This may well have contributed to the observed clusters of deaths in senior homes, and there have been case reports of severe illness and deaths occurring in young and middle-aged persons because of profound disturbances in blood clotting. Triggering clot formation in your vessels is always potentially life-threatening. If clots form at vulnerable sites in brain, spinal cord, and heart, interruption of blood flow may have irreversible and even fatal effects. It was for this reason that we wrote 1 week ago, entirely privately, to the EMA, alerting them to our concerns and requesting evidence that these possible dangerous effects of the vaccines had been excluded in preclinical studies prior to their approval. However, we have received no reply from the EMA, and we are thus forced to believe that the potential dangers of the vaccines had never been excluded.
That's quite a strong statement to end on. So what is the situation with the letter then?
Well, the letter's been drafted. This is a new organization. It's called Doctors for COVID Ethics, and they have released this letter to the public. Originally, Mike, this was done privately, okay, from professionals to the regulatory agencies in Europe. But as you can see, urgent open letter now from doctors and scientists to the European Medicines Agency regarding COVID-19 vaccine safety concerns. There's a URL down at the bottom if you want to go find this online, doctors4covidethics.medium.com. Let's look at some of the stronger statements that were made in this letter. And I'm telling you, this is everything you need to know about this case in terms of prioritizing safety and efficacy is in this letter. So I encourage people to get to it, use it, share it on social media, take quotes from it, and link to it. Everybody get on this immediately because it's so important, this information. But let's look at this. This is what they said. Should all such evidence not be available, the authors write, they're talking about the evidence regarding efficacy and safety. We demand that approval for use of the gene-based vaccines, they're talking about the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna to be specific, be withdrawn until all the above issues have been properly addressed by the exercise of due diligence by the EMA. So I mean, that's a really forthright declaration there and a real challenge to the regulatory body, but it goes on here. Let's take a look at what else they have to say. We are supportive in principle of the use of new medical interventions. However, there are serious concerns, including, but not confined to those outlined above, that the approval of the COVID-19 vaccines by the EMA was premature and reckless. And they continue, and that the administration of the vaccines constituted and still constitute human experimentation. I repeat, human experimentation on a mass scale, I might add myself, but here they finish off by saying, which was and still is in violation of the Nuremberg Code. So you can go and read the Nuremberg Code. I mean, this is part of history. There's a warning that was issued in the aftermath of World War II, is that there are certain lines, red lines, that countries, governments, societies cannot cross, okay? And these doctors are arguing, and not just them, Mike. There's a number of lawyers. There's a lot of people globally, doctors globally are asking questions about this all over the world. We have so many reports of this, okay? And what's happened? Well, we seem to have crossed that red line, but on a global scale. Where's the media on this? Where are the regulatory agencies on this? Where are the watchdogs?
Well, the watchdogs are the general public at the moment, it seems. The media, well, we'll come on to the media a little bit. And the regulators are fully on board with pharmaceutical companies, it seems. It
seems like they've been captured by corporate interests in this case.
Yeah, well, another day, another vaccine released, because this was what Matt Hancock was saying late yesterday evening, really encouraging results from Novavax tonight. It's on its efficacy against variants. We've ordered 60 million doses, and if approved by the medicines regulator, as if it wouldn't be, it will be another boost to the UK's vaccination rollout as we work to overcome this virus. So Novavax is claiming 100% efficacy. They're not even in the 90s%. They are claiming 100%. So that's quite a bold claim.
And it's the variants as well. So this is the UK's canard, basically. They're hanging the whole operation on the new variants. But then, unfortunately, the numbers don't reflect or don't show that there's a pandemic underway. We've shown the numbers in past programs, and you have as well, statistics on almost every single metric. And what are these variants? Can anybody prove that anybody has gotten ill or have died from any of these variants? Or is this theoretical, or what sort of science are we clinical? What sort of clinical science are we dealing with here?
None. But don't worry, because we have a new target group. We're going to vaccinate the homeless. We've got to vaccinate the homeless, apparently. This is the JCVI, that's the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, has advised the government to prioritise people experiencing homelessness, including those sleeping rough, for the coronavirus vaccine. They say that many people who are homeless or sleeping rough are likely to have underlying health conditions which could place them in priority group 6. These are likely to be underdiagnosed and not properly reflected in GP records. And they say that due to current restrictions, many thousands of people who sleep rough have been housed in emergency accommodation. This provides a unique opportunity to offer vaccination to those often unable to access basic health care. So they're advising local teams to consider a universal offer to adults experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping alongside those in priority group 6. So here is Professor Wai-Shan Lim from the JCVI, and he said, people experiencing homelessness are likely to have health conditions that put them at higher risk of death from COVID-19. I found this press release extremely interesting, Patrick, because that was as far as it went. No statistics, no comment from the professor that there were 20% of all homeless people had COVID-19 in the past 12 months, and 200 or 300 of them had died, or whatever it happens to be.
So a vague claim, but nothing to support it.
Nothing to support it. And here is Rosanna O'Connor from Public Health England. She said people who are homeless experience some of the highest rates of poor health outcomes and undiagnosed health issues. But again, no comment about COVID-19 specifically. And in fact, if we look at the mainstream press over the last period of time, we've seen headlines like this: coronavirus hasn't devastated the homeless as many feared.
There's a plethora of reports that reflect this exact same thing. So what are these Public Health England officials talking about, Mike?
So where is the urgency in this case to prioritise this particular demographic? Here's another one from the Telegraph. Homeless people are trying to catch coronavirus report finds. Well, I'm not going to focus too much on that.
To get the payment, right? Is that what they're saying?
Well, no, they're saying because it would mean that they would get accommodation, at least temporary accommodation. But this was the point. The Office for National Statistics showed that even before the pandemic, the estimated deaths of homeless people reached the highest on record of 778, an increase of 7.2% since 2018. 2 in 5 deaths were related to drug poisonings, while suicides increased by 30%, up to 112. So this government hasn't cared, and the JCVI hasn't cared, the Public Health England hasn't cared about homeless people at any point in history until now, and suddenly they've got to be prioritised. This seems a bit coincidental.
Because Coroni's on the scene, that's why.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden we're interested in homeless people because Coroni's in the frame. So that's just a warm and fuzzy, plushy story there.
Yes. Now, a number of people sent this through to me. This is from LifeSite in Canada. Bombshell: Stats Canada claims lockdowns, not COVID-19, are driving excess deaths. Now, I think the UK column's been saying this since when, Patrick? April last year.
April last year.
But anyway, let's have a look at what this says. They say that Canada's National Statistical Agency stated in a report released yesterday that there are excess deaths in the country when compared with previous years, but those deaths are not due only to COVID-19, but are due increasingly to what it calls indirect consequences of the pandemic, in other words, government policy. And they cite examples such as delayed medical procedures due to lockdowns and increased substance use. They say that in the early months of the pandemic, the weekly number of excess deaths and deaths caused by COVID-19 were closely aligned and mostly affected older populations, suggesting that COVID-19 itself was driving excess mortality in Canada. But however, more recently, the number of excess deaths has been higher than the number of deaths due to COVID-19. These deaths are affecting younger populations, suggesting that other factors, including possible indirect impacts of the pandemic, are now at play. So what I really wanted to make the point here, Patrick, was that, of course, we have been on this for quite some time. And if we look at the latest report from the Office for National Statistics, and we look at where the excess mortality has been taking place, the first thing to note is that we've seen surges in hospital and in care homes back in April and May last year, and another surge during the winter months this year. But if we just take hospitals and compare that with people's homes, what we see is that in the summer months, from June until September at the latest, there was significantly below average mortality taking place in hospitals. That says to me that the hospitals either weren't receiving the usual levels of custom, or suddenly the hospitals have produced a magical result here, but nonetheless significantly below the average.
It is a combination of that, and also it tracks seasonally as well.
Yes.
So it makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. But if you look at the people dying in their own homes, in their own properties, whether it be rented or owned, it has been consistently above the 5-year average right through the year. So there was no similar reduction in excess mortality during the summer months in the UK compared to hospitals and compared to care homes. And that says to me that either people were not wanting to go to hospital because of the fear that had been put into them, or their hospital treatment had been reduced as a result of the hospital reorienting for COVID-19 alone to the detriment of other conditions. Or we're seeing a rise in suicide and substance abuse, as the Canadians are talking about, or a combination of all those things. And I think that it's about time there was some serious inquiry into why we're seeing this excess mortality in homes as opposed to other locations. In any winter flu season, we see, or any winter respiratory illness season, we see a rise in deaths in hospitals and in care homes. This year, it has apparently been above the 5-year average. But the point that's been made, one of the points that's been made to me a number of times, is that actually over the last couple of years, there has been less mortality than, we've had some pretty good years in the last couple of years. And so this horrible term gets used of dry tinder. So people that hadn't been killed as a result of the previous year's winter respiratory illness season, as might happen in other years, lived on through to the following year, and we saw some of that extra mortality that way. But I stick by what we have said from the beginning, that a lot of this excess mortality we're seeing even in the hospitals and the care homes has been a result of policy rather than COVID-19 itself.
And totally ignoring the concept of total harm reduction. I remember back in late March, early April, we showed the work of David Katz from the University of Yale. And you have to consider the total harm reduction of the measures that you're taking, and if they're causing more harm, the response, the mitigation measures, then the actual threat from the actual thing that you're trying to protect the people against, in this case, COVID-19, then obviously the policy's no good.
Right.
And you could say the same with vaccines as well. And that's a legitimate question to ask that doctors are asking. Is the risk of injury or death from the vaccine greater in some population clusters than the actual risk from dying of COVID? Because if the answer is yes, you have a big problem with regards to this rollout. And there's a great term from that Canadian article that I think would be an absolute propaganda jewel in the crown. So some advice to Sage here. Indirect consequences of the pandemic. Use that when you're talking about lockdown deaths. Indirect consequences of the pandemic. That's we're throwing you a solid to the Behavioral Insights team.
Yeah, go
Good
for
work.
it. Yes. Okay, what's the situation in the United States then with regard to coronavirus? What has Biden been up to?
Biden, no one's seen much of Biden. He's elusive. He's one of the most elusive presidents in history. He hasn't done a State of the Union or a speech or anything to the people, but he does appear from time to time.
He hasn't even done any press conferences, I understand.
No,
I think he's doing his first one this week, isn't he? Today, maybe?
Apparently. Joe's a little bit slow, so we got to give him time. But so Joe's all about the pandemic. He's all about vaccines. He wants to get as many shots into people's arms as possible. And this is the metric that the Biden administration has for success and for helping the country defeat the pandemic. The pandemic. But listen to Joe here.
I've told you before, I carry a card in my pocket with the number of Americans who have died from COVID to date. It's on the back of my schedule. As of now, total deaths in America, 527,726. That's more deaths than in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined.
So
it's a death cult. It's a death cult. 500,000, 600,000. The number just keeps climbing and climbing. It'll climb in perpetuity forever. Normally, you cut off seasonal deaths on any pathogen or whatever at the year, and then you start from zero again. But not with this. Not with COVID. You got to keep the meter running there. So, what do you think about conflating COVID, dying with or from, or any possibility, or diagnosed as COVID without a test or a PCR test? All of these numbers that they're and comparing that to deaths in wars. World War I, World War II, Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, deaths in wars is pretty clear what the cause of death was, whereas deaths from a pandemic, particularly this one, it's not clear at all because there are no postmortems being done, no way to tell whether somebody has died of or with, so it's quite.
The demagoguery is unbelievable.
Yes, for sure.
It's completely outrageous, and people should be pushing back against this. So, but the media is totally supine in America. And Joe pulls out his card. I've got my card. 600,000 deaths this week. My staff have given this to me, and he puts it back in his pocket. So he pulls that thing out every week and reads it. This is like some bizarre skit from some comedy show or something. I don't know.
So anyway, the deaths then justifying the vaccines.
Yes, the vaccines, and that's his big deliverable, is the vaccines. Here's Joe promising victory.
I set a goal that many of you said was that kind of way over the top. I said I intended to get 100 million shots in people's arms in my first 100 days in office. Because we've actually on track to reach this goal of 100 million shots in arms on my 60th day in office. No other country in the world has done this. None. Let me be clear. That doesn't mean everyone's going to have that shot immediately, but it means you'll be able to get in line beginning May 1. Every adult will be eligible to get their shot. And to do this, we're going to go from 1 million shots a day that I promised in December, before I was sworn in, to beating our current pace of 2 million shots a day, outpacing the rest of the world.
What an achievement.
Spectacular.
America is back. We're going to put 2 million shots a day in arms. Thank you, Joe. So he's the pandemic president. Okay, this is Joe. Let's listen to, this is the coup de grace. This has to be the coup de grace here. Take a look at this. Washington Post, democracy dies in the dark. Sure it does. There he is. There he is. That's Pandemic Joe, as he's known. Where would he be without the pandemic? Nobody knows. Nobody knows where he is anyway on a good day. So Independence Day is the goal line for Joe Biden. Let's look at this. So it's been just under a year since former President Trump set the ambitious goal for moving beyond the coronavirus by Easter. That goal, as with many of Trump's predictions and goals during the pandemic, proved to be overly optimistic, says the Washington Post here. And they go on. Here's the kicker. July 4th. Biden has cast it as the chance to not only mark our independence as a nation, but we begin to mark our independence from the virus, says Joe Biden. I'm so inspired right now. You have no idea. He said that the goal will be to have small gatherings rather than packed churches. He's talking about Easter, Forget about Easter. That seems to be canceled. That Trump suggested could be just around the corner. So I mean, that's what they're putting out there. So here's Joe. This is his big 4th of July speech here. This should make you feel really, if you're an American listening, you should be really proud right now. This is, I mean, the patriotism is just sizzling up my kundalini right now. Listen to Joe Biden.
Because here's the point. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout or a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day. That doesn't mean large events with lots of people together, but it does mean small groups will be able to get together. After this long, hard year, that will make this Independence Day something truly special, where we not only mark our independence as a nation, but we begin to mark our independence from this virus.
Spectacular.
I got a news flash for you, Joe. Most people are already independent from the virus, but you don't seem to be independent from the virus. He's basically saying, what happened to Independence Day? They said, oh, it's Independence Day, 4th of July, but not big gatherings. You just might be able to meet with a few people in your back garden for a couple of kielbasa's and burgers. So it's something to look forward to. My goodness. My goodness.
Well, okay, let's come back to the UK then. And I want to really highlight a fantastic piece of citizen journalism here. This is from a website called Citizen Journalists. Doing the job corporate media or corporate journalists don't is how they tag themselves. And the headline here is confirmed there wasn't a whole ward of COVID children as claimed by Laura Duffel of King's College Hospital. So what was this about? Well, the BBC had interviewed this lady, Laura Duffel, on the 1st of January 2021. And she had said, she was speaking to Adrian Chiles on Radio 5 Live, and she said it was minimally affecting children in the first wave, but we now have a whole ward of children here. This was her claim.
And of course, Adrian Chiles, being the great journalist it is, he did question her, right? He pushed back on that claim, right? No,
which is why citizen journalism have done exactly that, and they've done the work. And so here's the result. So here's citizen journalists, and on the 1st of January, the writer emailed the hospital and asked them the following: could you tell me how many children are currently being treated for SARS-CoV-2 in your hospital? By children, I'm referring to those under the age of 18. If I could also have a breakdown of that number into age brackets too. And they responded on the 24th of January, and they said the below figures are accurate as at the 12th of the 1st, 2021, and in alignment with our daily statutory submission to NHSI. And as you can see, that they had 2 children between the ages of 0 and 5, and 4 children between the ages of 6 and 17. So that's 6 children in total in the hospital. Now,
must be a very small ward, Mike.
Well, this is a good point, but this is what the author has, the point that they were making, because they wanted to know, were these 6 children on the same ward, because they wanted to know what size the ward was. They were quite happy to consider the possibility that the children's ward may have only had 6 beds. So the fact that there were only 6 children may well have meant that the statement made by the nurse was absolutely correct.
Technically correct.
Yes, but the trust replied 3 of the patients were on the same ward, the other 3 were all on different wards. So that confirmed that the statement was incorrect. So the author went back and said, Laura Duffel, who is a matron at King's College Hospital, said on BBC on the 1st of the 1st, 21, that there was a whole ward of children with COVID-19 at the hospital. Can you confirm if this claim is true? And if so, how many children exactly were on the ward that would make it full? And the response came back: to manage predicted demand generated by the second wave of COVID-19, the Trust converted one 12-bed paediatric ward to a COVID-19 only ward. On the 2nd of January 2021, there were 2 children at the Trust who were on this ward. Wow. So I have to say, well done to Citizen Journalists website and the person who wrote this article, because this is what we need to see much more of, challenging statements that are being made unchallenged on the BBC or in any other old media organization.
Time and time again, whether it's in the UK on the mainstream media or in the US, you see these people that would appear out of nowhere, people, nurses or hospital officials, and they make these big sweeping statements on the press, Mike, and then they make claims that are completely unsubstantiated, and they have been proven time and time again to be totally exaggerated and sort of engaging in the worst kind of fear tactics and demagoguery. And a lot of these people end up being in line for MBEs, or they get, they get media publicity out of it or something like that. So this is a whole new breed of kind of medical professionals or nurses, doctors, YouTube doctors,
yes.
Sky News doctors.
Yes, and they're being encouraged by the mainstream press. And one of the worst, of course, is Channel 4 News, who are absolutely on board with the current government narrative. But they didn't seem to always be. At some point in the past, they seem to have switched from being quite a challenging media outlet to being absolutely on board with everything government says. So somebody sent this to me, and thank you very much to the person that did. It's from 2009. It's Channel 4 News, and I'm not going to play the entire clip, but I'm going to play a little bit of it just to give you an impression of what Channel 4 News used to be like, and just compare that with what we see from BBC and Channel 4 News these days.
Greatest medical scandals of the century, according to a leading health expert in Brussels. The Council of Europe health chief has accused major pharmaceutical firms of organizing a campaign of panic and unduly influencing World Health Organization decisions. And with European countries now burdened with bills for millions of unwanted doses of the swine flu vaccine, he wants an investigation. Our science correspondent Tom Clark has this report.
The predictions for the impact of swine flu on Britain were grim. The government's response, spending hundreds of millions of pounds on antiviral drugs and vaccines, adverts and leaflets. Were governments misled into preparing for the worst? Politicians in Brussels are now asking for an investigation into the role pharmaceutical companies played in influencing political decisions that led to a swine flu spending spree.
There must be a process to get more transparency, how the decisions in the WHO, how they function, and who is influencing the decisions of the WHO, and what is the role of the pharmaceutical industry there. I'm very suspicious about the processes which are behind this pandemic.
The Council of Europe Committee want the investigation to focus on the World Health Organization's decision to lower the threshold required for a pandemic to be formally declared.
The world is now at the start of the 2009 influenza pandemic.
When this happened.
So, look, that's just a little snippet from that report. I'm sure if people hunt for it, for the full report, they'll find it online. So in 2009, Patrick, Channel 4 News was leading the way in criticising what was going on with respect to swine flu and the fear that was being generated in order to generate a market for unneeded vaccinations.
And the Tamiflu debacle and all of this sort of exaggerated claims. And as you mentioned earlier when we were talking for the show, the World Health Organization lowered the threshold for declaring a pandemic.
That's exactly the point they've just made,
and lowered it further last February.
Yes, in
2020.
So that was 2009. Now, when did Bill Gates come on the scene with the World Health Organization? Was that 2010 or so?
Around that time is when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation started getting and really pouring money right around the industry in terms of pharmaceuticals, vaccines, funding for all sorts of institutions, especially the World Health Organization. So really stepped it up at that point.
Yes, so it looks like they tried to pull this gag back in 2009. It failed. It was called out by the mainstream media at the time. The mainstream media isn't calling it out anymore. But as soon as that year was finished, then we started to seeing the major push from the vested interests to make sure that situation could never arise again.
A lot of analysts look at 2009 swine flu and they said that was the test run for what we're seeing right now.
Yes.
And it didn't quite get lift off. It didn't quite work. It was problematic. They had massive pushback, as you can see, from mainstream media. But all of those holes have been plugged, especially the media coverage. We'll show you how that works. I might add, just before we go on, Mike, Jon Snow. What happened to Jon Snow? He was doing good journalism. He was opposing the Iraq War. And all of a sudden, he's the first when they say once you become red-pilled, you never go back? Jon Snow red pilled, and now he's addicted to blue pills again. So he did sort of reverse in the other direction.
Yes, I'd like to understand that a little bit. But what's Billy Goats up to these days?
Billy Goats is back in the news. Unfortunately, this is a daily occurrence. But look at this. This is from the Children's Health Defense Organization here, headed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Look at this headline. Before COVID, Gates planned social media censorship and vaccine safety advocates with pharma, CDC, media, China, and the CIA. What's he talking about here? Well, take a look at this. In October of 2019, shortly before the COVID outbreak, Gates and other powerful individuals began planning how to censor vaccine safety advocates from social media during a tabletop simulation of a worldwide pandemic known as Event 201. Now, a lot of our viewers, Mike, will be familiar with that. That was an event. It was staged. It was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted by Johns Hopkins University. A lot of major players were involved in this simulation, you might call it, but it was almost like a walkthrough, really, from what we saw in 2020. I mean, but this was just a coincidence, nothing to see here, but they go on. Look at this. At Gates's direction, these eminent role-played members of the Pandemic Control Council, that was the name of the group in the simulation, wargaming government strategies for controlling the pandemic, the narrative, and the population. Now, you have reported about the control of the population with the Behavioral Insights team, Spy B, and really gone into detail how that's carried out here in the UK vis-a-vis the government. And we've also shown some similar things in the United States. But take a look at this. Here's the transcript from their simulation here. Look at this. If you go and read through this transcript from Event 201 here, this is absolutely fascinating, and it really shows you how they've really focused. This is one of the big areas of this simulation, was how to control the narrative, how to deal with dissenting opinions, with alternative media outlets, with people on social media, challenging vaccines, for instance, challenging the pharmaceutical companies. That seemed to be the biggest concern, one of the biggest concerns of this event. And so there's no question from any of these people. Look at this. This is a quote I picked out here, Mike. Some governments have taken control of national access to the internet. Others are censoring websites and social media content, and a small number have shut down internet access completely to prevent the spread of misinformation. Penalties have been put in place for the spread of harmful falsehoods, including arrests. So this is what they were sort of wargaming back then. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, that was just theoretical. Well, we're seeing some of the very same things happening today.
Well, we're going to come on to that in a little bit, yes.
Exactly. So here's Robert F. Kennedy. He wrote this piece here. This is what he said. And this should really wake people up here. Over the last 2 weeks, Facebook and other social media sites have deplatformed me and many other critics of regulatory corruption and authoritarian public health policies. This is Robert F. Kennedy from Children's Health Defense. And then he goes on here. So here is some fodder for those of you who have the eerie sense that the government industrial pandemic response feels like it was planned even before there was a pandemic. So, you know, he's been accused of being many things, and normally he's being accused by people that he is exposing. And they're calling him a conspiracy theorist, they're calling him all sorts of, an anti-vaxxer, okay, an accomplished lawyer, a great litigator as well for environmental and health causes. And his organization he's put together, they have exposed so much. And he's being deplatformed by Silicon Valley for printing facts, for printing peer-reviewed science, and for challenging this pandemic industrial complex he's calling. It's not an exaggeration. So the censorship is real, Mike.
It certainly is.
The censorship is real. We've been censored. This program, the UK column, has been censored for these under these very auspices. And 21st Century Wire was also censored yesterday. Here's 21 Wire video banned by YouTube. This was the title of the video. It was "Why Should You Question Vaccine Passports?" Why you should question vaccine passports. It was taken off YouTube And it's really just an audio clip of myself from the Sunday Wire with some music and some stock footage over the top. So it's really just me giving my analysis, challenging the policy. But that was deemed here by the censors, the high priests here at YouTube, as medical misinformation. Medical misinformation. So challenging the WHO, here it is in print, this is forbidden, any content which disputes the efficacy of local health authorities or WHO guidance, WHO guidance, on social distancing and self-isolation that may lead people to act against that guidance. What do you think of that statement there? I mean, that's a pretty wide net that they're casting, isn't it? Every public health official, local public health official in the world, right?
Well, exactly, and it is a wide net that they're casting. They can just make it up as they go along. Now, 2 weeks ago, you were on this program, the 12th of February. That program was removed from YouTube using the same terms, medical misinformation. There was a request from us to get more information on why that. Specifically, what was it that was that triggered it, and they refused to respond to that, so we actually don't know, and they aren't saying what it was that caused that takedown. But Whitney Webb's been taken down from YouTube. Vanessa Beeley's been taken down, from Patreon. Vanessa Beeley's been taken down from YouTube yesterday, completely, her channel closed. And a number of others that will come to mind in a minute. Have
many others.
Many others. So the deplatforming is moving ahead very, very quickly now.
And after you appealed and told me you didn't get any response for that, so I didn't bother appealing that way. I just said to them, why don't you change your community guidelines to say any criticism of the WHO policies or local health policies is forbidden. Just come out and say any criticism of policies is not allowed on our platform. That would be more honest of YouTube. But instead, they're using these vague catch-all sort of dragnet, basically, so they can arbitrarily strike down any content which they don't like for political reasons or just because it goes against the corporate agenda of some of the biggest advertising spenders on those platforms, by the way.
Yes.
So what I did was take the video here, why you should question the vaccine passports. I put it on Rumble. It's doing very well on Rumble. This is a more of a free speech oriented platform. So we put it there, and we've also given it to people that they can take it and distribute it themselves. So, but moving on, Mike, on the vaccine passport issue, this is from MIT's Technological Review. Denmark is one of those countries you mentioned earlier. They've been pushing hard very early on for this Corona passport. So as a small sort of centralized European country, the experts believe that they could implement this more efficiently and better than any other country here. And so this is one of the heads of that program here. And so what the authors here are saying that it might be difficult. They're going to run into ethical considerations, data considerations, and so forth. And so here is the author of this particular initiative here, Martin Peterson Lennarts. His real title, Mike, is Danish Public Sector Leader for the IBM Global Business Services.
All right, IBM Global Business Services, I see.
So he's apparently running point, promoting this new vaccine passport system in Denmark. And this is what he has to say. I just called him a technocrat, by the way, because his title was too long. He says, of the vaccine passport, it will combine data on tests and vaccines depending on local government rules. So you as a citizen just download the app and consent that the data be shared.
Yes.
And then he moves on. Then, when you enter an airplane or a concert or a restaurant, it generates a QR code and for the business to scan. From the front end, it's rather simple here. So what is this? This is going to be track and trace, isn't it? The vaccine passport is going to be used as a track and trace app.
Well, in the UK, it's very, very likely to be part of the track and trace NHS app infrastructure, yes.
So you will be tracked and traced.
Yes.
Whether you're healthy, whether you're sick, whatever country you go to, what venues you enter?
Well, this is the key thing. The problem with track and trace at the moment is that a positive test comes up. So say I test positive, Patrick, then I have to tell the people at the Track and Trace Centre who my contacts were. That might be you, for example, unless I'm using the app that the government has provided, which I'm not. So that's my word then to identify everybody. But if there's a requirement for anybody who's entering a venue where you're going to be in close proximity to anybody else, there's a requirement to scan a QR code. That problem goes away. That's why it's very important for this to be linked to Track and Trace for government.
Mm-hmm. So you literally, from the time you walk out the door, if you walk out the door and you go to work, you go home, you go on holiday, you come back, every single move that you make will be recorded.
Yes.
Through this data sharing network, and it will be blockchain based, so that it can't be erased effectively. It depending on how you interpret blockchain technology on that.
Yes.
But do you think this is a good idea? Is this the sort of thing? By the way, it's not going to end, Mike, with just COVID and vaccines. Digital identity, digital currency, social credit, carbon credits, and access to basic services.
Yes.
That's where this is going. Okay, it's not just going to end with vaccine passports and you get to go on holiday and get drunk on the beach for 2 weeks. It's much bigger than that. We are being lured into a system, and it's a globalized system, and that is really the end of your personal sovereignty, and quite frankly, it'll be the end of national sovereignty.
Yes.
If it's allowed to progress down that road. That's a serious statement. I agree, but that we believe those are the end game implications of this technology.
Okay, if you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us there. That'd be fantastic. And please also share our material that you find on the various platforms. That would be great as well. Now, in the last couple of programs, we have been advertising Lynda Thyre's legal expenses crowdfunder. It was up to around £16,000. And then this happened. Patrick, campaign not found. So it has been taken down by GoFundMe. Nobody is really aware of exactly what the reason was, but lots and lots of people and everybody that contributed to it has received a note similar to this. Please note a refund has been issued for your donation to Lynda's legal expenses, and the amount will return to you within 3 to 7 business days. If you have any questions, you can find answers and contact us 24/7 via the GoFundMe Help Centre, but nobody is getting any actual help from that other than it's no longer there. So I'm not aware at this point exactly what alternatives might be pursued at this time. So we will let everybody know as soon as possible. This is obviously going to be hugely disappointing for Lynn herself, who was really needing that to pursue her legal case in France.
Where could the pressure have come from, Mike? Only 2 places, right? Government or the pharmaceutical industry. Where else would it be coming from?
Yeah, well, the problem. One of the problems here is there's huge pressure on these platforms to be regulated, but there isn't any. Nobody's talking about transparency and decision making with respect to the regulation, it's do as the government says, but you don't have to explain to anybody why you've done it. And we're seeing this. You've already talked about this with your video removal on YouTube. We're seeing this on all the platforms. Things happen. You've got no real right of appeal. You've got no real right to understand exactly why your material was removed. That is in this case. It is on YouTube and it's on all the other platforms as well.
And I might add, there's a third party, Mike, that might also be likely for this cancellation of things like a GoFundMe with Lynda Thyre. It's the mainstream media. Journalists are harassing these platforms. They call them, they pressure them. They say, why are you running this platform? Why are you allowing this person on Facebook? Why are you allowing this person on this platform? And they do this, and they're basically threatening Mike to write a story about it or to expose it. And all of these websites, they don't want anything to do with bad press. So what are they going to do? The easiest route is just to close the account, to cancel it, and bow to the pressure of some of these busybodies that in the mainstream media, and they work on behalf really of government and big pharma. That's how we've experienced it firsthand. Certainly with Media on Trial, the cancellation of that, the pressure came from specific members of the mainstream media who got involved and really scared the council in Leeds, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is how it works. So that's how it works behind the scenes, just so people know.
Well, we have asked GoFundMe for comment, and if they do reply, we will of course let everybody know what that reply was. In the meantime, here's another one if you would like to help. This is Crowd Justice, another crowdfunder, and the appeal is stop masks in schools. And so what are they saying? This case is being brought by Law or Fiction and other leading lawyers involved in legal challenges to the government's response to COVID-19. We're opposed to not only the enforced wearing of masks by children, but all measures harming our children, the nation, the NHS and the economy, which are irrational or not justified by the evidence. The claimant is a child at school represented by their parent. The defendant to be named as soon as proceedings are issued is the child's school, which is adopting a face covering policy following government guidance, while failing to properly consider the impact on children and staff, which they're obliged to do. So you might want to consider that one. Now, let's move quickly on to Syria. And here's The Economist, and this is today, or it's for this coming issue of The Economist. 10 years of war have broken Syria into pieces, and this is a spectacular propaganda piece. A country divided is how they're describing it, so let's just look at some of the rhetoric. The price of food has soared in Syria. Well, it has indeed, leaving many of its people at risk of going hungry. No explanation about why the price of food has soared in Syria. Nothing said about the fact that the food growing regions are in the northeast where the United States is based, and nothing said about sanctions on the country. Nothing said about that at all. It's all about Assad. It's all Assad's problem. Assad has no answers. Well, of course, Assad has no support internationally amongst the Western nations that are imposing these sanctions. And so he doesn't have a direct answer to that, but nonetheless they are implying this is he is letting the Syrian people down in some way. In speeches he often ignores Syria's big problems, but only half of Syria's hospitals are fully functioning. Again, sanctions, but we don't need to mention sanctions. The implication is that the Assad government is somehow causing Syria's health service to fail. No, sanctions. Mr. Assad seems more concerned, they say, with keeping his people rather than the virus in check. Syria doesn't have a problem with the virus. People aren't dying in Syria at the moment of COVID-19. They've got other problems, and this is not even on people's minds in general. So travel beyond the capital, and Mr. Assad's government looks less in charge, even in the areas he nominally controls. In the portion of Syria controlled by the Kurds in the northeast, locals have ditched Arabic or Kurdish, and the dollar is preferred. Nothing said here, Patrick, about the fact that this is the United States occupied area, and that the US has been really playing with the Kurds.
And pumping dollars into that region,
of course, for many years.
Suitcases full of dollars.
Yes, so no wonder the dollar is preferred, because that's the currency that's available to them in that area. More pragmatic Syrian president might have tried to cut deals with regional authorities, devolving power in an attempt to keep the country unified. Of course, this is egregious propaganda, because what the Western world wants is to see Syria balkanized in the way that Yugoslavia was, for example, and this idea that Assad should help the West promote this Western policy. This is just insane.
Not only that, Mike, this is false, this statement here. Assad did reach out to the regional authorities, including the Kurds, very early on to try to come to some kind of a diplomatic solution, as well as paid the salaries, Mike, has paid the salaries to civil servants, any government employees, received their salaries, even in Al-Qaeda held territories in Idlib. So whoever wrote this article for The Economist doesn't know what they're talking about, quite frankly.
Well, that in no sentence of this article is there any indication that they know that what they're talking about, or it is just intended to be absolutely egregious propaganda. And then we'll end with this one. On March the 1st, the Parliament in Damascus ratified a law stripping citizenship from anyone who fails to renew their identity card after 10 years. It was aimed at those who have fled or broken free of Mr. Assad's rule. Many of them would like to return, but also want to see someone else in charge. Well, what kind of people are we talking about here, Patrick? Could we be talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, people that are sitting in Idlib province at the moment, who in fact have been cutting the heads off 12-year-old boys and other similar atrocities over the last 10 or 11 years.
People who took up arms against the state, people who accepted aid from foreign countries, accepted money and weapons from foreign actors, Mike. People who are basically, a lot of them were also criminals. Some of them had criminal records before the war even in some cases. So there's a whole mix of different situations there. But the bottom line is, if an enclave in the UK, a few thousand people in Britain, tried to overthrow the government and occupy Cornwall and started killing people and bombing everything and taking snipers against police officers, do you think they would go to renew their ID cards after 10 years? No, they want to
probably
be.
not.
They'd want to be completely invisible because the minute they do that, they're going to have to be held accountable for the things that they've done. Why should it be any different in Syria?
Yes. So the question is, was Vanessa Beeley's YouTube channel taken down because of comments that she'd been making on coronavirus and COVID, or was it because, in fact, there is pressure coming on Syria once again? I think that's much more likely. And there's an attempt to shut down any opposing voice against what's the pressure that's being built up on Syria at the moment. Now that Biden's back in control, that agenda is right back on. But if we think back to the past, one of the big events that was really pushed by the mainstream press, which demonstrated the atrocities of the Assad regime, as they call it, was the alleged Duma chemical weapons attack. And of course, this was pushed by the fact-finding mission in Syria of the OPCW. Well, a group of people have got together and signed what they're describing as a statement of concern on the Duma investigation by the OPCW, and they say, "We wish to express our deep concern over the protracted controversy and political fallout surrounding the OPCW and its investigation of the alleged chemical weapons attacks in Duma on 7th of April 2018. Since the publication of the by the OPCW of its final report on March 2019, a series of worrying developments has raised serious and substantial concerns with respect to the conduct of the investigation. These developments include instances in which OPCW inspectors involved with the investigation have identified major procedural and scientific irregularities, the leaking of a significant quantity of corroborating documents, and the damning statements provided to UN Security Council meetings." They say it's now well established that some senior inspectors involved with the investigation, one of whom played a central role, reject how the investigation derived its conclusions, and OPCW management now stands accused of accepting unsubstantiated or possibly manipulated findings with the most serious geopolitical and security implications. We call on the Director General of the OPCW to find the courage to address the problems within his organisation relating to this investigation and ensure state parties and the United Nations are informed accordingly. In this way, we hope and believe the credibility and integrity of the OPCW can be restored. So who's signing this then? Well, we have Joe Bustani, the ambassador to Brazil, who was the first Director General of the OPCW and former ambassador to the UK and France. Noam Chomsky is on the list, Andrew Cockburn, Daniel Ellsberg, Professor Richard Falk, Tulsi Gabbard signed it today, Professor Ulrich Goldstein, and you can see the list which goes on here, Ray McGovern, ex-CIA, Elizabeth Murray, and so on. The list is very eminent, and this needs to be taken seriously. We'll be publishing the full details on the UK Column website this afternoon. Even Alan West, Lord West of Spithead, has signed this. So
it's a bipartisan list there. I mean,
yes.
You've got people on the left, you've got people on the right, mostly on the left, actually. So it's beyond any doubt, Mike. It was a complete cover-up. I honestly think it's going to be very difficult for the OPCW to reclaim its credibility and integrity after this, because it's just so systemic, the cover-up of this. And what they have is NATO, and you have Bellingcat and all these cutouts basically attacking the Working Group on Syria Media and Propaganda. They're attacking the dissenters on the OPCW. They're attacking WikiLeaks. They're attacking everybody who's basically leaking legitimate documents that show that there is actually an internal cover-up in the OPCW. The UN has all these documents.
Yes.
They have all these testimonies. Plenty of people know about this, and I think, Mike, too many people know about it now to put this genie back in the bottle, or whatever, sweep it under the rug.
But this, I mean, it can't be understated. This was one of the major events which was being used to try to drive a narrative which would have led to bombing, further bombing of Syria and further warfare in Syria.
It is a classic example of a hoax, a high-level hoax. They said there was, first it was a sarin attack, then it was a chlorine bomb that hit Douma, and that was the pretext for a military action. No investigation needed, and then they did this long, protracted investigation afterwards. And what did they find? Well, it turns out not very much. Not very much. So this is the war that we're in right now. I think this is really important as well, because any future aggression against Syria is really going to hinge on how people view, people that matter anyway, how they view this OPCW scandal.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to this then. The Bank for International Settlements is holding what they're describing as an innovation summit in a week or so's time. Well, what's this all about? It's all about digital IDs, Patrick. This is being pushed hard, but also digital central bank digital currencies. So the theme of the summit is how can central banks innovate in the digital age? And they're very interested on key issues around cross-border and retail payments, central bank digital currencies, banking and the new digital ecosystem, decentralized finance, data analytics, AI, cloud technologies, as well as cultural and organizational changes that might be needed within central banks to meet the challenges in this digital age. So we're talking about a total digital transformation, digital ID, as we mentioned earlier in the program, part of it. Who's involved? Well, of course, we've got representation from the Federal Reserve, from the Bundesbank in Germany. Mark Carney there, of course, who is a special envoy for climate action for the United Nations, and also Boris Johnson's climate advisor for the COP26. He's going to be speaking. He's particularly photoshopped in his image there, trying to look a lot younger than he is. But nonetheless, he's going to be there because that's really what this is about. This is Great Reset stuff.
Microsoft is in there as well, Mike.
Of course.
ID 2020, Microsoft is right in the fast lane, along with the big central bankers there.
For sure, and of course we've got Bank of England representation there from Sir John Cunliffe. So that'll be in a week or two's time, and looking forward to that. We'll see what they say. Now, the news from Norway, we've mentioned Norway a few times today, but I thought this was quite interesting. This is Norway and their fertility, and this has been published by the Norwegian Statistics Agency. And they're saying that Norwegian fertility has fallen every single year since 2009. Well, in fact, 2008 was really the inflection point there. And I'm just wondering, Patrick, whether this is mainly economic related, so immediately following the financial crash, whether that caused the latest downturn in fertility in Norway. But it is quite stark. They're saying that this has broken several annual records in a row, and it's reaching an all-time low. So in 2020, 53,000 children were born in Norway, and that's 1,500 fewer than the year before, 8,800 fewer than in 2009. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, other than, as I suggest, economic reasons. But and what's fascinating about that, if you look at the green line there, is all women in Norway. The black line is immigrant women. There is seems to be a correlation between the two. So it's, to me, it looks more like economic rather than environmental.
There could be economic, but there could also be technological. There could be legislative. There could be cultural. So there's a lot of, an increase in online activity, Mike. We've seen around that 2008 period where people spending, compounding the time spent on social media, on social networks in front of their smartphone. That's when that really hit, and not just doubled, but quadrupled in a space of just a couple of years.
Yes.
So certainly, from a social science point of view or a human science point of view, that would be something I would be looking at as well, as that might be a factor, that might be a variable in that trend.
Yes. Okay, we'll end with hacks. Computer hacks. And well, Patrick, over the last number of years, we've seen lots and lots of rhetoric in the press about nasty Russian hackers, state-sponsored Russian hackers. They've done everything from interfere with the US general election to the Brexit referendum to the Scottish independence referendum.
Despite any evidence that they actually have,
yes,
but a lot of rhetoric in the press, right?
So Russia now has been dropped as the big bad bear of hacking, and now it's China. So apparently there's been a huge hack on Microsoft Exchange email servers, which are usually run by corporate entities around the UK. This is from the National Cybersecurity Centre, and they've been giving advice following Microsoft vulnerabilities exploitation. They say that Microsoft has made public that sophisticated actors have attacked a number of Exchange servers, and in response have released multiple security updates for affected servers. These updates have been released ahead of the monthly update cycle because 4 of the 7 vulnerabilities have been used in limited targeted attacks. The security updates fix the vulnerabilities exploited in the initial attack. Now, in this particular release, the NCSC doesn't say who's responsible for it. It's left to Microsoft to do that. So let's have a look. Here is their press release on this new nation-state cyber attacks. And they're saying, today we're sharing information about a state-sponsored threat actor identified by the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, MSTIC, that we're calling Hafnium. Hafnium operates from China, and this is the first time we're discussing its activity. It's a highly skilled and sophisticated actor. Historically, Hafnium primarily targets entities in the United States for the purposes of exfiltrating information from a number of industrial sectors, including infectious disease researchers, law firms, higher education institutions, defense contractors, policy think tanks, and NGOs. While Hafnium is based in China, it conducts its operations primarily from leased virtual private servers in the United States. So what they're saying is that they claim that these are Chinese, that they're in China, but they are using computers that are based in the US. So that's good stuff.
Enemy within.
Enemy within.
Could be in a closet near you.
Yes.
Or Hillary Clinton's bathroom.
Well, indeed. So I just wanted to highlight a BBC article. I'm just going to hold on. If you just give me 1 second, I will quickly fix this because you need to see the headline of it. So here's the headline: Exchange email hack, hundreds of UK firms compromised, and they say hundreds of UK companies have been compromised as part of a global campaign linked to Chinese hackers. Cybersecurity firm Esset said more than 500 email servers in the UK may have been hacked. And many companies are not aware that they're victims of the attack. It comes as governments around the world warn organizations to secure their systems. But this was the bit that caught me with the BBC's coverage of this. The headline or the subheadline towards the end of the article: beware the second wave. So we're starting to see COVID language being brought into other topics in order to maintain the propaganda effect of the terms that are being used. I thought it was spectacular.
Wow, first wave, second wave, get your updates, get your patches, viruses. These are all things that Bill Gates perfected during his days at Microsoft.
Yes.
He knows how to spin a buck or two out of viruses and patches and updates. So what's coming next? The hacking variants. Could have some online viral variants. Now, the next thing you should be looking out for.
Yes, indeed. But it was China. Don't worry.
It was. We thought it was the Russians, but it might be China. When it might have been hacked. Might have been hacked. We don't know, and you won't know if you've been hacked.
No, you won't.
You won't know. But trust us.
But get your system vaccinated.
We're the government. We'll tell you, and Microsoft will tell you if that's what's happening.
Yes, indeed. Okay, we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time, 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. We hope to see you then, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.